Hello and welcome to video lecture series in political science. Today we are going to discuss chapter 2 titled as End of Bipolarity from your class 12th political science textbook Contemporary World Politics. For understanding, we have divided this chapter into 4 parts. So far in the first part of this chapter, we have discussed about what is bipolarity and what was Soviet Union. We discussed about its emergence through Russian Revolution and the other constituent republics of the Soviet Union. We also briefly discussed about the various areas in which Soviet Union or the USSR excelled and matched the US. We briefly discussed about the Cold War rivalry and the division of world into East Bloc and the West Bloc. Today we will discuss about what were the features of the Soviet economy. We have discussed a lot about Soviet Union. Today we will discuss the specific features of the Soviet style of economy. And what problems did the system face and who attempted to reform it? Now, as you know, the basic principle of socialism is that all the individuals in society should have equal access to basic goods of consumption, which are important for livelihood. Now, in such economies or societies, the government offers basic necessities like education, health, childcare, welfare, pension. It provides these facilities either free of cost or at basic minimum cost. All the land and the assets in the society are owned and controlled by the government. As the large-scale industries are run on collective efforts of people, that is the workers, hence the returns or the profit generated from these industries must also be used for the benefit of the entire society. Now, we have been discussing about Soviet type of economy. Let us look at some of the characteristic features of Soviet type of economy. The Soviet type of economies generally refer to those states that have adopted a Marxist-Leninist ideology to organize economy or relations of production. That is, no space for private property. Although the states with such type of economies may be different from each other, but there are some structural characteristics which are common to these economies. Now, what are these characteristics? These are that the major institutions of Soviet type of economy revolve around centralized planning. There is one central planning agency that decides about what? Allocating state supplies among various organizations and the enterprises in the economy. Then they plan that how these enterprises which are engaged in production and delivery of goods and services to the people in economy are related to one another. These enterprises generally include associations and organizations that are linked together, again according to the plan as designed by the planning agency. In Soviet style of economies, all the members in the society share equal benefits. Even those who cannot contribute, like the disabled elderly people, those who cannot contribute to the economy, but they can still get benefits of development, as these people are also the responsibility of the state. The survival needs of each member in the society is met according to his needs by the state, and there is an equal distribution of resources and wealth. And unlike capitalism, there is no socio-economic class, that is division of people on the basis of private ownership of property. Now, although the idea of socialism is attractive and desirable, but in the case of Soviet system, it faced a lot many problems. What were these problems? Let's discuss some of these problems. Starting from 1960s till the middle of 1980s, Russia looked to be a very strong state. It stretched from the Pacific in the east to the middle part of the Europe, thus covering almost 1/3 of the span of the earth. The Soviet Union also had a very strong military, and it was consolidating its position day by day in comparison to the US. In fact, during the ideological divide between the East and West, many of the countries from the Third World, which despite claiming that they are non-aligned, were actually inclined towards the Eastern Bloc headed by the USSR. The USSR espoused the cause of communism, and most of these developing countries after gaining independence adopted socialism as the basic model of economic and social organization in order to develop. However, Soviet system over a period of time started to crumble down it started facing economic and organizational problems. The economic organization in the Soviet Union was designed on the basis of a system that was developed by Joseph Stalin. Who was Stalin? Stalin was a successor to Lenin, who led to the consolidation of Soviet Union from the middle of 1920s. After consolidation and coming to power, Stalin began massive and rapid industrialization of Soviet economy and imposed collectivization of agriculture. Although there are no precise figures to demonstrate the growth of economy, but it is generally said that Soviet Union achieved significant levels of economic growth under the leadership of Stalin. But this growth was achieved at the cost of millions of lives. Stalin was very authoritative in his style of functioning. He used to eliminate his rivals for the complete control of his party. And how did he eliminate his rivals? He eliminated his rivals and enemies by executing them or sending them to labor camps, etc. Stalin was also held responsible for the Great Terror of 1920s. Although the USSR was one of the allies of the US and the UK in World War II, but after the end of Second World War, Russia and US entered into a strained relationship. And this tension was rooted in ideological divide, as we have discussed during the Cold War, over capitalism and socialism. The Soviet Union under Stalin's leadership was transformed radically. It was transformed from a peasant society into an industrial and military superpower. Although Stalin was brutal and he ruled by terror, but still somehow he was very popular among people. After the death of Stalin, his successor, Nikita Khrushchev, started the process of de-Stalinization. That is, changing the way Stalin had organized the economic activities so far. Yet, Stalin is considered to be one of the important figures in the history who transformed the nature of Soviet society and economy forever. Over the years, after Second World War, seeing the success and all that, the Soviet system became very bureaucratic and authoritarian in nature. From the middle of 1970s, the Soviet Union was facing a large number of socio-economic problems. The people were not allowed to raise and express their voice of dissent, that is, speaking against. Media was also highly controlled and tight, and it was censored. That citizens could not express themselves freely because of over-control of social and economic life. There was lack of democracy, and there was absence of freedom of speech. Stalin's era was an example of strict regimentation. There's one example that comes to us very often is that one day, one worker who was around 25 years old got 10 minutes late to his work, and then as a punishment he was imprisoned for 35 years. Now you can imagine the regimentation and the degree of discipline in Stalin's era. The crucial departments such as those responsible for personnel hiring, general police, secret police and youth departments were strictly communist in nature. People were not allowed to speak out openly, but they often expressed their secret voices through jokes and cartoons. Most of the institutions in Soviet Union needed massive reforms. For example, the one-party system itself. The one-party system in the Soviet Union was represented by the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. The Communist Party had tight control over the government institutions and all the organizations. There were vast layers of bureaucracy in political organization, and these layers were full of corruption. On top of it, the Communist Party was not at all accountable to the people or to the general masses. Although Russia was one of the 15 republics that constituted the USSR, but in fact Russia dominated every aspect of life of people in all the other regions of the Union. The people from other regions felt ignored and marginalized, and their voices were suppressed by dominant Russia. The Communist Party did not pay attention to the demands of the people from these other republics to manage their own affairs. Along with this, there were also many problems with the central planning to run economy. And one general problem was the lack of incentive for productivity. Once a Soviet citizen had said that they pretend to pay us and we pretend to work. That is, both of them are not seriously or committed towards the work or either the payment. There was no incentive for people to be creative or enterprising or to develop entrepreneurship. There was no incentive to work hard than what they were doing. As everything was pre-planned, there was no reward for being innovative and there was no competition among people. As state offered welfare to everyone, even to people those who could not contribute to the economy, so it charged higher taxes for offering services to the people either free or at the minimum cost, because these people were the responsibility of the state and state had to collect money from somewhere. Now, another important challenge for this economy was, or the centrally planned economy was, that it faced or suffered from delay in decision making. This delay in decision making came from the bureaucratic attitude of government employees, red tapeism or corruption. That is, we will take some time to decide about, or the files will not move. What happened in Soviet Union was that, although it emerged as a rival superpower to the US, it almost remained equal in the arms race also against the US, but it developed its military might at a great cost. Slowly, gradually, the Soviet Union started to lag behind in technology that was available to the West. Lack of incentive for innovation, no competition stifled the growth and progress of the economy. The USSR economy failed to sustain the growth it had achieved initially during the Stalin era. It could not offer people the infrastructure, latest technology, services, amenities that were available to the people in the Western world. In fact, the system could not fulfill, or it failed to fulfill, the socio-economic and political aspirations of the people within Russia and among the republics that constituted the USSR. Along with these problems with the Soviet system of planning and organizing economy, huge expenditure was also being incurred on Afghan war during 1980s. In this time, the wages increased, but the productivity went down as there was a lack of resources, because the resources were being diverted towards the Afghan war. All this situation led to the shortage of consumer goods. So what happened? Russia started to import food grains, which also increased its debt. The Soviet economy, which was faltering during the late 1970s, became stagnant during the 1980s. The Western free market economies were more productive and prosperous on the other hand. The planned economy of the Soviet Union could not compete with the competitive economies of the West. The agricultural output dwindled in the USSR and industry faced a crisis. The telecommunications also could not match the quality that was now available in the Western world. And under the strict censorship of the Communist Party, media also could not develop or grow as compared to the Western counterparts. In Soviet Russia, only basic minimum consumer goods were available to people, but they also lacked quality and variety as compared to the products that were available in the West. Gradually, there was a shortage of supply of almost everything. It was in the consumables and the food shortage that the crisis was quite acute. Let us look at some of these pictures. They tell you a story. These pictures have been collected from various sources such as blogs, websites, etc., which are listed as Creative Commons. Now, this picture shows a line outside a store selling clothes. You cannot imagine such lines outside clothing outlets. And this is a picture which shows people are looking at the meager selection at a meat store. Only 2 varieties of meat and rest of the shelves are all empty. In most of the pictures that we are going to see now, you just have a look at the shelves which are there in the stores and just try to see that how many of these shelves are empty. Now, people in line always were worried that the stuff will run out and their time will be wasted standing in the queue. And once again, this picture shows you the empty shelves. That was a very usual phenomena in most of the stores or departmental stores, and you can see a long queue of the people at one of the counter in the background. And this is a line to buy shoes, probably imported, because Soviet shoes were ugly, heavy and uncomfortable, as it was said at that point of time. The lines were usual when products arrived at the shop and people were afraid that they'll run out of the stock soon, so they would stand in queues for hours together to buy these products. And this is a line for bread. And this is, you can see how many people standing to buy meat in the shop. And because the stores usually closed for 1 hour during the lunch break, people were still standing outside waiting for the store to open so that they do not miss out with the products. And people were forming lines in anticipation of the delivery, but many a times the delivery did not happen. And on the left hand side of this picture, you can see all the shelves are empty. And even if the delivery occurred, there was pushing and shoving with each other, which was not uncommon. And sometimes it also resulted in fights between people. And in this picture, you can see the entire store is empty, but one shelf is full of something which looks like a jam or a jelly, which is an unwanted item which people did not want to buy. In 1985, Mikhail Gorbachev became General Secretary of Communist Party of the Soviet Union. Gorbachev started the process of reform of the Soviet economy and political organization. As compared to the West, the Soviet Union was lagging behind in technological development. The living standard of the people was quite low. The military expenditure being incurred by the Soviet Union was quite high. The agriculture was in terrible state. This expenditure or the military expenditure was draining the resources that could have been used for the development in other areas of economy and agriculture. It is said that at this time, one American farmer was 7 times more productive than his Soviet counterpart. In fact, Americans excelled in terms of use of technology, latest equipment, high per capita yield, etc. But in Soviet Union, the people were dissatisfied because they were not allowed to speak against the system and they were given whatever was available. Gorbachev took over at the time of this kind of acute crisis, and there was high degree of dissatisfaction among people. He sought to reform the system, although it was a difficult task to reform the stagnant economy and highly inflexible political organization. But Gorbachev had a dream for Soviet Union. He began the process of reform by opening up channels to discuss national issues. He attempted to normalize the strained relationship with the West and democratize his own system. At this time of crisis, Gorbachev realized that solving the problems of stagnant Soviet economy was a difficult task, if not impossible. But it almost looked impossible at that point of time. It required reforming the political and economic structure of the communist nation that was stagnant or inflexible for over 2-3 decades. Gorbachev tried to reform the stagnating party also and the state economy by introducing some important principles. What were these principles and what were the reforms that Gorbachev initiated? We'll discuss in the next part of this chapter. To conclude, let's summarize what we discussed today. Today we discussed about Stalin's authoritarian style of governance. We discussed about the nature of Soviet economy. How and why did Soviet Union lag behind as compared to the Western world? We discussed about the problems that plagued the Soviet system and how it started to collapse rapidly after 1980s. In the next part, we'll discuss about the reforms that Gorbachev initiated and was he successful in initiating these reforms. Till then, you can enjoy reading this part of the chapter. Thank you.